And actually, we're going to start with who we are and also who we are not. So I'm Kristen. I'm a PhD student in theater at UC San Diego. And I mentioned here that I am a language enthusiast. I am not a linguist by trade. I have not studied linguistics. That is not the theoretical end of things is not my area at all. But I offer that at least to provide some explanation for when this project came up, why I agreed to do it, instead of just saying no.
I'm Alan Malai. I'm an MFA acting student at UCSD, UC San Diego. I love long walks on the beach, and I'm a sandwich enthusiast, which as of last week I got a job making sandwiches, or turning passions into and also not a linguist, though I can speak Spanish. I'm a native Spanish person. Cool.
That's right. So, right. So the language that I developed is called Rodash, and it was developed for a production last winter at UC San Diego, which is a stage adaptation of Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew, called Taming of the Shrewd. And basically, the goal essentially was, so the idea of the production came out of a concern from some of the women in our MFA program that they wanted more substantive roles for women, because if you look at the theatrical canon, it's heavily weighted towards men. And so they wanted some additional opportunities. And one of our directors said, great, let's do some Shakespeare. We'll do an all-women Taming of the Shrew. We'll call it Taming of the Shrewd. And her concept for that was to actually set it in a post-apocalyptic future, where you have a band of women warrior actors that are putting on Taming of the Shrew as a cautionary tale. To remember sort of how things were back when the patriarchy was running things, essentially. And so in the course of doing this, and of course Taming of the Shrew in and of itself kind of examines ideas about gender, it examines ideas about power, it looks at how control manifests. So it was a pretty pointed choice in terms of which play we were going to look at. In the course of development, one of the things that happened is that it turned out that there were 3 MFA men that needed a home. So we said, great, we'll take the men too. So we had all the women and then we had the men, and the point was that the women were going to have kind of the substantive roles, including the male roles in Taming of the Shrew, which meant, what are we going to do with the men? And conveniently, we already had this idea of a post-apocalyptic future. So we said, great, there'll be a band of raiders, they're going to show up in the middle of Act 1, they're going to they'll attack the women will take them prisoner, and then we'll figure the rest out later. And that's basically what we did. Yeah. So we have this group of women. Here you see one of them standing on top of their base of operations, and they are attacked by these guys, who we call the others. So this is Max, Hunter, and Alan. And so the way that it kind of started in the early production process is that, and I should mention what was I doing on this. So I was the dramaturg for the production. I don't know, how many of you are familiar with dramaturgy at all? Yeah, that's pretty normal. So in short, dramaturgy can take a lot of different roles depending on the needs of a particular production. So for this one, part of what I was responsible for was providing assistance to the actors in terms of the Shakespearean text to make sure they understood what Shakespeare was saying, since that can get a little dicey. And then providing sort of context information. So we knew we were working on a post-apocalyptic future, so then it was sort of like, okay, so what are typical concerns? Part of my role was to ask questions about the world for the director to think about. So what kind of apocalypse do we have? We're talking zombies, we're talking aliens, climate change, like where are we here? And so when we settled on a kind of climate change related disaster to avoid the need for zombies making an appearance and something like that. So let that go. And so that was part of it, and because this production required the construction of a frame, my job was to write the frame. So all of the text that surrounded the Shakespeare, I wrote. What that meant, and why it's significant here, is that when we had these guides, I was constructing them from scratch. The band of raiders that interferes with the Shakespeare doesn't exist in the Shakespeare. So they didn't exist prior to the construction of the frame. And so, yeah, here's another view of them after they've been captured by our fierce band of warrior women. And they get chained to a ladder for a while.
They look very relaxed for being touched.
They were very sassy at that point, but also tired.
And we were watching the show.
Yeah, basically the women kind of said, like, okay, we will deal with you later, we will chain you to a ladder, back to the Shakespeare. And that's exactly what they did. And so part of what would happen is that as they're watching the show, you get these interactions where they keep sort of arriving and interrupting the Shakespeare as we go, until eventually they end up casting the Shakespeare in sort of some of the subordinate roles. So you'll see some of those images later. Okay, so the language itself. I met with the director relatively early on, and we were talking about the frame and what she wanted. And one of the things she said was like, hey, you know that old trope where men and women are so different that they practically speak a different language? Like, yeah. She said, can we do that? I said, yeah, if you want. She's like, yeah, but not like French. Okay, she's like, it's gotta be like fierce, like masculine. Like, I'm not sure French men would feel that, but okay. Do you mean? And she said, no, like Klingon. And I was like, so you want a constructed language? She said, yeah. I said, okay. She said, can you do that? I was like, I guess, let's go. So I went out and I did a bunch of research and started to compile this thing and to put it together. And so thinking about what the piece was actually going to need, we knew that it would be cast. We knew that I had 3 actors that I had to work with. One of the things that I realized kind of after the fact that would have been really useful to think of beforehand was that I built in a number of sounds that I just liked. And since I was building it, I could do what I wanted, so I put them in. But that included a rolled R, and it occurred to me too late that I didn't know that all 3 actors could roll their Rs. So as sort of a caution, should you find yourself in this situation, you may want to check with the actors to see what sounds they can and cannot produce functionally. Or alternately, if you're casting later, that's great. You can pick people that can do the thing that you need them to do. And then the other thing is that the director, as I said, had this really particular idea of what she wanted, that the language had to sound masculine. And I feel like there could be hours spent on just kind of trying to deconstruct what that's about, and like how that works, and all of the kind of subtext, if you will, that's tied into the idea of like that language can sound feminine or sound masculine. Like that's like gender studies paper that is waiting to be written. But yeah, so she wanted kind of a particular sort of sound palette, and I had to figure out what that was. And the other thing is that, so we kind of inherited these men after the fact, which meant that they weren't going to be showcasing their skills in terms of the Shakespearean text. So part of what I needed to do was to produce enough text to let them do their work. They needed to be able to do their jobs as actors. So they couldn't, at the risk of sort of minimizing what you do, they couldn't just sort of like run on with maces and like grunt and hit the women and run away. They needed to actually have things to say. They needed to be able to actually build characters and do the work of actors. So that was kind of where we were. Initially, the director had asked for something that bore some resemblance to English, with the idea that the audience might be able to pick up some of it. So I tried to do that at first. It rapidly became clear that I totally, utterly failed at doing that. If you look at it in print, see some vague resemblances in some places, but I changed the grammar too much, as it turns out, and I used a bunch of sounds that don't really happen in English, so I kind of just ignored what she asked for and did that. As one does. So there was that. The second thing is that from a development perspective, I knew that they were going to be invading, so I knew, because we'd already decided that we wanted a big fight sequence when they arrived. And so the first time, I knew that the first time we'd see them was going to be in the context of an attack. So the question in terms of language that I needed right away, because I needed to kind of get this moving very quickly, was, what do you say at the start of an attack? When you're invading a band, yeah, exactly. Like some kind of battle cry, is it instructions? And so actually what I started doing was like, you get them, you go over here, kind of stuff. And so then, moving on from there, it gradually kind of built to, okay, so what happens after you've been captured, and so on. So we started with a relatively small amount of text that went to the actors to begin with. That text alone gave us some grammatical features that gave us a little bit of insight into who these people might be. So right away there was reciprocity that was starting to happen between the characters that they were building and the language itself. And then just kind of very quickly, the last thing that I tried to think about in terms of this instruction that I needed to construct something masculine was that I tried to work within the idea that these were aggressors. So they're working in sort of a fairly flat, traditional concept of what masculinity looks like. And so thinking about facial expressions, this is sort of tip off here. I tried to look at sounds that would produce the facial expressions that go along with particular emotional states to give them something to work with. So I tried to add in sounds that would encourage kind of growly faces that would give you some anger, some contempt, some disgust, the kind of stuff that you're going to be working with.
Fantastic. So, to start off, how do you create a character, embody a character, and then act in a scene as this character when you don't understand the language, when there's no, you can't think, you can't really improvise. If a line falls, you can't pick it back up like we do in English, especially if you understand the character, you can kind of improvise your way through a scene if you go blank, which is what we're training for, is to not do that. And so we do you have to go back and do the exact thing you would do with a normal, an average character from an English play that we understand, which is who am I, where am I, and what do I want? This is the basics, and the best thing you can do as an actor is to get specific. So though we didn't have anything really to go on except for this constructed language, we came together, the three actors and Kristen, and we kind of decided, okay, what is our background? What is our name? How old are we? What is our origin? Within this post-apocalyptic world, how are we different from the female tribe? How are we similar? And that also informs what we do physically. And so we decided to pair, not decided, it kind of happened, that the language and the circumstances helped give us the physical life of these characters. When we all kind of came back together after a couple of days of rehearsal independently, we realized that a lot of the physical act, what we're doing with our bodies, is similar. The way that we presented ourselves. Some would call it, like peacocking. Whether or not our chest was out and whether or not we were flexing muscle, if we were passive. And within the three of us, it's the hierarchy, who's in command, who's older, who's more passive character. So first we went ahead and got specific, and then can we go to the next one? Embodied the character here, we kind of go with circumstances. So now within the scene, now that we've been captured, once we've defined everything as to who we are, so my character, being the tallest and the widest in the group, became more of the aggressor, more of the muscle in the group. And so automatically, like even as I'm talking now, it kind of drops your voice a little bit, the resonators from the chest and from the diaphragm. They start to really inform this low pitch yet pretty far through voice, if you would. And so what they started to do to us is once we got captured, they started to use the weaker will, if you would, to become part of the show. And so at the end, I was the last one left, so I refused to do it, being more proud. And then obviously he who was first wears the skirt. And he was, and then that question comes up when we're doing the design, the costume design. Would your character be comfortable wearing this? You separate yourself from the actor, as the actor, and you decide, okay, yes, the actor, we're comfortable wearing whatever, if anything. And it depends. And so that's not the factor. The factor is what would the character be comfortable wearing? So my character would never wear a skirt. And so in the slide before, you saw that he had like a sweater that they tried to kind of, they put a little flower, a little embroidery, and a little, just to give it some kind of, just to like demean us in a little bit, especially with this character and the way that he presented himself. And the language, what do you say about others when you're talking in the group, when you're talking to the women? How does that inform you physically? And then, are you in control or submissive? Who has the power in the scene? And then, go to the next slide. Then comes in the language, this constructive language that now helps complete the character in that, okay, physically this is where I stand, this is where the circumstances and this tribe, this post-apocalyptic, and us taking over this group of women, how does that affect me? How savage do I become? And now does the language complement that, or does it fight it? And Kristen did a wonderful job of creating a language that's very aggressive, very animalistic, and so that helped us get more carnal, if you would, bloodthirsty, and that kind of helped inform this. As you see, we all kind of came with this animalistic approach to the characters, where we were growling a lot, we were showing our teeth, peacocking, a lot of, and also like, where is language made? Like, where does the sound come from? Is it guttural? Is it in the back of the throat? Are we throwing it forward, like English speakers? Are we like monotone, like American English speakers? Or does it have a melody to it? And that also helps inform how these characters come to life. The moment you try to fight that with a melodic character that has a high pitch, and you try to be this animalistic, there's very obvious friction between the two. It doesn't complement itself the way that it would compare them to. You can't help it. And even as I'm explaining it, I feel like I'm kind of like punching over and getting into it. So yeah, that's kind of the little basics of how we approach the character, not knowing the language, or thinking the language, more feeling it. Came more from what that did to us internally, and then expressing it externally.
Yeah, and so there were a couple of things that happened. So they had that initial block of text. Like I mentioned, one of the things that we found was that in terms of how verb tenses work, we kind of jointly discovered that there wasn't a conditional tense. And part of that was that it just, in the course of what they were saying, they didn't really need it, but it offered some interesting implications of, okay, so what kind of people don't have a conditional tense? What does that mean? What may that indicate for them culturally? What kind of people are these? In addition, because the text was still being created, so we had that initial fight sequence, and then we were sort of figuring out the rest as we went along, there was this opportunity so that the actors would kind of come forward and say, hey, we need a battle cry. Can we have a battle cry? And I was like, sure, I'll give you a battle cry. So they gave him battle cry. And they came out and they're like, we need some obscenities. And I was like, of course you do. So I gave them some of those. They came up at one point, and when they're chained to that ladder, the women are sort of doing their thing. We're like, we need catcalls. I was like, great, I'll make up some catcalls. So I came back and gave them some catcalls. And then there were all these different scene interruptions, and those